My name is Nicolas Sauvage. I'm the president of TDK Ventures. And today, alongside with my TDK Ventures team and our co-host, Climate Investment, we welcome you to Energy Week, our third annual gathering of leading thinkers, entrepreneurs, and investors focused on the critical need for sustainable energy transformation, what we call EX. For over 85 years, it has been TDK's mission to create a better world through technology. From origins in ferrite materials and magnetic tapes, to today's development of energy-efficient products used across renewable energy, power generation, and transmission systems, to industrial robots and devices for smart cities and smart houses. TDK is making full use of its accumulated power electronics technology to contribute to the development of energy transformation. At TDK Ventures, we are carrying that mission forward as we put $350 million at work, investing globally in early-stage tech startups in next-gen materials, energy and clean tech, computing and connectivity, mobility, and industrial startups. I am proud of the industry recognition TDK Ventures has received for our entrepreneurs first focus. In addition to financing, we bring a full measure of what we call TDK goodness to each startups to help accelerate their success, elevating their inventions from idea to implementation, from prototype to production. We add value to every startup we invest in, providing support like early product validation, pilot programs, access to TDK customers and channels, sharing industry and outsourcing connections, and market insights. It is with this commitment to entrepreneurship and to scaling impactful solutions to solve the world's most pressing challenges that we created Energy Week. We are proud to host this year's event with Climate Investment. Raise your hand if you're from Climate Investment. Oh, wow, this is amazing. An independently managed private markets investor for industrial decarbonization, founded by members of the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. Climate Investment backs technologies and models reducing GHGs in heavy emitting sectors. Their portfolio of 30 energy industry, built environment, transportation companies has achieved more than 57 million tons of CO2 reduction. Advancing the complex goal of energy transformation requires a truly united effort. We are grateful for the incredible enthusiasm and participation from our speakers, startup presenters, and our audience of more than 400 people who join us today both in person, here in London, and virtually around the globe. This is our first hybrid Energy Week. We've designed the format to be highly interactive, and we invite each of you to contribute to the discussion as we come together to gain valuable insights from prominent figures across the energy sector, explore the latest developments, trends, and innovative approaches driving sustainability in the energy industry, and 3, identify opportunities to make a positive impact in the rapidly evolving energy landscape. Over the next 2 days, you will learn from startups innovating in the space and participate in key discussions on the climate impact of generative AI, the future of building and the impact of climate change, and the future of the European energy mix in 2030. You will learn from a number of incredible Energy Week speakers this year, including Diana Ahmed, Chief Strategy Officer at Our Next Energy, Claire Curry, Head of Technology, Industry and Innovation for Bloomberg NEF. Nilay Shah, Professor of Process Systems Engineering at Imperial College and Director of Zero Petroleum Limited. Henry Sanderson, author and journalist, Executive Director at Benchmark Mineral Intelligence. And Cindy Boff, Managing Director at Climate Investment. I'm incredibly excited to introduce Michael Liebreich, a leading global expert on clean energy and transportation, smart infrastructure, technology, climate finance, and sustainable development. He is a former advisor to the UN on sustainable development, Energy for All, member of the Board of Transport for London, and founder for Bloomberg NEF. Michael is currently chairman and CEO of Liebreich Associates and co-managing partner at Ecopragma Capital. He is a member of the UK Board of Trade, an honorary fellow of the Energy Institute, and a visiting professor at Imperial College London. Welcome, Michael, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you. So, Michael, let's start with maybe the most obvious question to start. Why are you so passionate about energy transformation?
Oh gosh, that's a very personal question. I mean, I didn't start doing what I do because I'm an environmentalist. I'm an outdoorsman. I was a skier and a climber and so on. But I think it's really about elegance of solutions. There's just something fundamentally wrong about processes that create, waste, and that waste is not just, it's not a theoretical thing. It's very, very harmful. And so I think that's the mainspring. Underneath it all, it's about just, we just should be doing this in an elegant way that is respectful of, ourselves, our kids, future generations, and the planet. So it's about elegance more than anything else.
So let's talk about elegance towards a very simple goal, which, even though simple sounds nearly impossible, the net zero transition.
Right.
And if we forget about timing for just a second, what do you think are the biggest challenge to get to net zero?
So I think ultimately we will get to net zero, and ultimately we'll get to a fully circular economy. It's just it is the elegant. Elegance also means more efficient. It means lower cost. It means all the sort of lower externalities, and so ultimately we will get there. Burning stuff is. This morning I was with a large European gas company, and I was telling them that burning stuff is stupid. But it is, because it makes no sense to have a flame at 2,000 degrees to heat a house to 21 degrees. I mean, that's not elegant. That can't be it. Right?
That can't be it.
That can't be it. And as you go through the whole economy, and you can see the kind of inelegance. The fact is, people talk primary energy. Primary energy. 2/3 of primary energy is waste. Waste is thermal waste. That's ridiculous. And but then food, 40% is waste. Jonathan Maxwell's going to be one of the speakers later. I'm sort of probably stealing his thunder here, but a lot of this makes no sense, and it will be squeezed out of the system. And we are. My vision of the economy is a very kind of ecological vision. So nature has got to the point where it recycles absolutely everything.
It's smart.
And it's smart and it's circular. And then you've got all these people who say that we couldn't possibly, we couldn't possibly be as smart, and we couldn't possibly achieve circularity. And of course we can. So I'm very optimistic, but clearly it's a multi-decadal process. And in fact, it's a centuries-long process, really, going from coal to oil and oil to gas and gas to renewables, and moving up, using more high exergy electricity, and so it's not a quick process. So I suppose I'm feeling very philosophical this afternoon. I mean, I'm very optimistic, but it won't be fast. And then the reason it won't be fast is there's just a lot to do. Very capital intensive, long asset lifetimes, and it's the biggest challenge conceivable.
And so going from this inelegance to the elegance, which is fully circular, fully green, and you mentioned multiple decades.
Yeah.
Tell us what you think is the number of decades, and what could we do to accelerate or shortened by 1 or 2 decades?
So, if you ask me to say, well, which decade do I think it'll all, when can we declare victory? And it's not just climate. We are talking about these other planetary boundaries and biodiversity and so on. I think, I'm kind of a 27 guy, right? 2070 guy.
Oh.
I think that we have to be realistic. We're not on track for 1.5 degrees.
You hear people gasping at 2070.
Well, 2070 is kind of because, I will be around in 2050, possibly even still working, but I won't be around and working in 2070, so it's kind of a safe bet. But no, I think, we're not on track for 2050, right? Net zero 2050. The rich countries, UK, Europe, North America, Japan, South Korea, if they get their act together, if we all get our act together, we could do 2050. When you look at economies that are still having to electrify, having to get electricity to people, or where people still don't have concrete floors in their homes and they still have dirt floors, so their top priority, I hate to say it, is not leapfrogging to some perfect solution. And so I think that there will be countries, the Glasgow pledges are about right. 90% of the global economy has committed to net zero 2070, 2/3 of it by 2050. And I'm like, look, if we could just deliver that, that's pretty good. And I think we can, from a sort of engineering and a societal perspective and a capital formation perspective. I can't see any reason why not. And the thermodynamics makes sense and so on. So I'm a 2070 guy, and if that's not good enough, then I guess you can either go faster or you can suck carbon out of the air after that, or something else. But that's where I think we're headed.
You just mentioned about developing countries. From inelegance to elegance, from inequity to equity. What do you think are the right solutions, like Global South and ability for them to catch up, but in a way that's equitable?
No, you're jumping to what are the solutions. In a sense, we first have to acknowledge we've got a problem.
Yes.
And it's all very well. We all talk about how cheap renewables have become, right? Well, if you're in Zambia, Ghana, they're still expensive because your cost of capital is high. If you're in Malawi, South Sudan, where capital is, impossible, these things are not cheap, and so you're still going to be using your, diesel for forever unless something gets fixed. The other side of the justice coin that we really need to acknowledge is that we're all, pushing ahead with technologies that require a lot more mining. And I don't think we're doing nearly enough to make sure that we're doing that in a just way. So we could be all virtuous, net zero 2050 in Europe, fabulous, but we've pillaged Papua New Guinea, Bolivia, et cetera, et cetera. That's not a solution. In a sense, what I'm saying, flip it around, what I'm saying is, first of all, like Alcoholics Anonymous, first be aware of the risk.
You have a problem.
Yeah, first accept that we have a problem. Yeah. We have a problem of justice, and we have it both in terms of the differential. A lot of the Global South investment problem right now, a lot of investment would be unleashed if the differential cost of capital could be fixed. So the Bridgetown Initiative, or whatever can help. That's a piece of it. But then on the mining and minerals side, maybe that's an area of great innovation, because we will fix it partly through technology, partly through societal awareness, partly through regulation, and partly we won't fix it. You want me to be sort of endlessly optimistic? In fact, that was the
no. I want you to have both a mix of pessimism and optimism.
So So 2070 is a pessimistic view, right? It's not we're all screwed. It is we're going to be too late for 1.5 degrees, but probably in line with, let's say, 2 degrees. And there will be a certain amount of pillaging and injustice, and that very much bothers me. But I don't see that we're going to sort of jump to perfection. You only have to look at what's going on in the world to know that perfection is kind of not one of the drop-down options.
Far from it. From it. What do you think have you seen anything interesting in the mining to solve mining? I mean, clearly you have the recycling part, which would be diminishing it, but have you seen anything interesting?
Yeah, yes, there's so there's a lot of different ways of dealing with the mineral challenge. You say one is recycling, there's also dematerializing. So, if you look at the first Nissan Leaf had a 70-mile range, and the Nissan Leaf today has a 210-mile range, and it's got basically the same amount of stuff in it. Yep. And so, circularity is an interesting one. It's a lot closer than we think, because if you can recycle and you can get 95% of your materials back, but in the 15-year life or 18-year life of that battery, you've become 30% more materials efficient, then effectively that material, that piece of mining that you've done in 2017 or 2028, that then works forever. That metal works forever. So recycling is a big bit. Reducing the material use is a big bit. Substitutions. I've invested in a company that's getting magnesium out of seawater and salt, and that will substitute for a lot of aluminium. Magnesium is 2/3 of the weight of aluminium, and a lot of the aluminium will substitute into copper. So we're going to have these substitutions as well going on. I think that one of the big trends is clearly around electrochemistry beating out thermal chemistry. Whether that will go all the way to Boston Metals beating hydrogen for steel, I don't know. But right across a lot of what we do, whether it's fixing nitrogen or all sorts of things, where electrochemistry looks really, really promising. And it's more elegant because you're hitting the reaction with a specific packet of energy, not kind of heating everything up and stirring it and grinding it and hoping for the best. So I see a lot of, I think some of the materials problems will be solved through the better processing. It's going to be a sort of all of the above. And I don't know if you want me to say sort of deep sea mining, the most exciting thing ever. That kind of worries me because we don't sort of know what's down there.
We have no idea what would be the impact either, do we?
My suspicion is that the impact will be not very much. I mean, in the sense that, look at what we've done introducing, agriculture around the world. And was it a big impact? Yes, but we all still live quite well. And there's lots of animals for David Attenborough still to film 30 years ago. So, we shouldn't overestimate the that sounded really callous, didn't it?
It was good.
No, but do you know what I'm saying is that, yes, there will be devastation of some, of vents in the Mariana Trench, and it may not have a huge impact on anything that we currently care about. I just don't think we should destroy them anyway. It's not elegant to destroy things you don't understand.
Absolutely. You talked about many materials, including hydrogen. You just updated your hydrogen ladder. Tell me if there was a big surprise in the change and things you did expect and you were happy to see change.
So I'm assuming, should we assume everybody, does everybody know the hydrogen ladder? Show of hands? Nearly everybody. So what you've got is at the top.
But there's an audience online. So.
Audience online. Well, I'm going to assume that there's some people who've not heard of it. So
exactly.
It really came out of, hydrogen, the salience kind of started to soar in about 2016, 17. I've seen it all before because when I started New Energy Finance, I nearly joined a fuel cell company as CEO. Because there was the hydrogen economy stuff back then, and there was another. So every 20 years, there's this hydrogen sort of hype cycle, bubble, whatever, and it started again in 2016, 2017. I ended up writing some stuff in 2018, 19 on the supply side, on the demand side. I got it separating hype from hydrogen. And then I came up with this schematic. In fact, I stole it from a friend of mine, Adrian Heel, from Energy Cities, borrowed it. And he's very happy because he's become famous. And what it does, it puts the things that we definitely need hydrogen for, clean hydrogen for, at the top, because we're currently using dirty hydrogen. And then you've got the row of doom at the bottom, where there's all these businesses, the ones that the politicians like to sort of put on a hard hat and get a photo next to a hydrogen train. Those are all row of doom. They're not going to happen. Hydrogen two-wheelers and taxis and all sorts of silly things. And then there's array in between. And it's an attempt to kind of synthesize all the different multifactorial things. It's efficiency, it's economics, it's safety, it's human behavior, it's geopolitics, it's thinking through supply chains, how long it takes to create them, availability of PGM materials. We talk a lot about copper and nickel, but actually, fuel cells PEM fuel cells use lots of platinum. And so everything, put it all together, one schematic. There were lots of changes in this version, small changes, wording changes, a few things I'd missed out and so on. But the big lessons, the big messages, some stuff we have to do, some stuff which is stupid to do, those have not changed. And in a way, there's been a bit of a sort of, almost a kind of hollowing out of the center, that we become more certain that we have to do clean ammonia for fertilizers. We become more certain that we're going to need long duration storage, and it's a hard problem, that if somebody can crack it using hydrogen, that's a good thing. But we also become more certain that, you know, hydrogen buses will be expensive to run, or hydrogen trains, because we've now got some data coming through from some trials. And I've become, you know, I did a big deep dive in heating, hydrogen for heating. And the more you dive in, the more you think this is just being promoted by companies with gas networks who themselves presumably know that it's not going to be a thing. And so there's this kind of filtration process. So it may end up turning from the hydrogen ladder, you know, a few things at the top and a lot of stupid stuff. It may actually end up being a kind of hydrogen hourglass with, you know, some big things at the top. Because the other... what was really interesting was mapping volumes against the rows. And, you know, there are some people who say, oh, well, you know, we must only do green hydrogen. That's the pure thing. Well, the top row alone is about 1.5 times all the wind and solar installed to date. So wind and solar today delivers 15% of all global electricity. Take all of that, multiply it by 1.5, which is going to be about the next 5 years of installation of wind and solar, and you could decarbonize just the use of hydrogen in petrochemicals and fertilizer. So if you believe the ladder, then and you think it's going to be the top row and a chunk on the second row, you basically believe in blue hydrogen. And you better be out there holding your politicians and the industry to account for doing blue hydrogen right. Because if you don't do blue hydrogen, we will be spending, you know, 20 years just doing hydrogen, no heating, no, all the other use cases, electrification of transport, heating, you know, everything else, just the grid, all of that would have to wait while we do 1.5 rows of the ladder if you just want to do green. That's the engineering supply chain, that's the time constant reality in all of this.
So let's double click because it's clearly a big deal.
Yeah.
What's the challenge and opportunity for blue hydrogen?
So the challenge is that if you have...
and maybe you can define blue hydrogen.
Right, so blue hydrogen, hydrogen from natural gas. If you just use your average natural gas from Tajikistan or, you know, sort of developing countries, you know, Texas, Oklahoma, that sort of thing, you know, then you've got, let's say, 3% fugitive, maybe even more. We don't even know in Tajikistan or in Russia. If you do that and then you only capture, let's say, 80% of the CO2, then frankly, you might as well not bother. You might as well literally not bother, because the inefficiency of turning gas into hydrogen and then using the hydrogen, if you've got these losses, you might as well not bother. Just burn the natural gas and be done with it and stop pretending.
Which we agreed was stupid.
Sorry?
Which
is a very, yeah, exactly. So the challenge is that we need, you know, now you can, the North Sea basin, so the leading companies in the leading and highly regulated countries, they have something like 0.1, 0.2% fugitive methane emissions. And you know, you've got professors in the US who are basically just activists pretending to be professors who say it's impossible to do 0.1, 0.2% fugitive methane. That's not true. It's a question of will of society. If we regulate, and we've seen this, there was a huge fire on an offshore platform called Piper Alpha, and the whole industry around the world changed its practices around offshore rig management and made it safe. And that's the sort of thing that we need for fugitive, and we should be doing it irrespective of hydrogen, nothing to do with hydrogen. We should be dealing with, there was COP26 in Glasgow, there was the methane, fugitive methane initiative, and they said, oh, we'll reduce fugitive methane by 30% by 2030. I'm like, you what? 30%? this stuff is just flowing out of, valves and taps and flanges. And I mean, this is so easy to fix or to reduce. And so now suddenly they're talking about 70% reduction by 2030. And that was the number that I was, sort of pushing at them. I didn't realize they were listening. But we need to do, fugitive emissions we should deal with anyway. And then, of course, autothermal reforming. If the engineers are told you will do 97 or 99% carbon capture, and they're given the money, not just to build it, but also to run it and maintain it, of course they will. These are the most sophisticated engineering companies in the world. But they have to be given by society a very clear mandate. And then I think, it can be done.
So please listen. And methane is 20 times more potent than CO2.
On a 100-year basis, 20 times. On a 20-year basis, it's, I think, 88 times. And by the way, hydrogen is on a 100-year basis, hydrogen is 11 times as bad as CO2 per kilo. And on a 20-year basis, it's 33 times. And this matters, just by the way. Interesting fact, NASA used liquid hydrogen for the shuttle program. And 46% of the liquid hydrogen that it bought evaporated. 46%. It's a powerful greenhouse gas. Daimler and Volvo think we're going to have liquid hydrogen trucks. I'll just leave that out there.
No comment. Now, let's go back to this glass house top. Which ones, you talked about long-term grid storage. Is that a big one that we could tackle?
Yeah, so interestingly, I've done some work quite recently, which is sort of, I don't want to say it doesn't counter-argue against the ladder, but what it does, it positions the ladder is, in a sense, an inevitability scale. It's a kind of, when the chips all settle in 2040, 2045, 2050, what will we be using hydrogen for and what won't we be? And so, in a way, it's no regrets. If you did clean hydrogen for fertilizer or for whatever, that we're definitely going to do those things, right? And long duration storage is a B, steel is a B, and I was very happy, and I was putting my kids through school, going around the world, talking about the hydrogen ladder. But then, more recently, I've done a piece of work where take 1 terawatt hour of clean electricity, because if you agree that the clean electricity supply chain is constrained either by land use or by the number of developers or by the availability of ball bearings or whatever it is that constrains the growth. And, it is constrained. If anybody says it isn't, of course it is. The electricity is only 20% of energy and wind and solar is only 15%. So we're basically at something like, 4%. And we'll grow that, but there's a time constant involved. So if you're constrained on clean electricity, what should you do with each terawatt hour of clean electricity? Which is sort of cutting the question slightly differently.
Yep.
The answer is you do 3 things first. So not in order of inevitability, but in order of priority, what do you do with the clean electricity? Number 1, push coal off your system, because coal is really carbon intensive. Number 2, put that electricity into a heat pump, because that multiplies it by 3, 4, whatever. Number 3, put it into an electric car, electric vehicle, because that replaces 25% efficient use of whatever with 85% efficient. So you're multiplying your use. The 4th thing is clean steel. Not clean ammonia, not fertilizer, but steel. Why? Because if you do clean steel, you're displacing coal, coking coal.
Oh, yes.
If you do clean ammonia, clean fertilizer, you're displacing gas. So go for the coal. So those are the 4 things. So what you've got is the hydrogen inevitability is the stuff that you're using hydrogen for today, but you're generally using it from gas. So in a way, if you said, right, okay, what should, if Michael was ruling the world and we were going to do net zero as fast as possible, what would we do? Leave the top row, do steel, get rid of coal for electricity, do heat pumps, do electric transportation, then do hydrogen for steel and long duration storage. Why? Not because it decarbonizes anything of itself. It's not because it replaces gas or replaces coal, but it enables large amounts of wind and solar to come onto the grid.
Exactly.
So it's an enabler of cleaning up everything else. And when you've done all of that, then get to the top row and do, because then you're into how do we get rid of gas? At that point, you're then pushing gas out. So the next, 2 decades would be electrify everything, steel and long duration storage, and then after that, do everything else gas.
I think Michael just gave a very nice roadmap for climate investors, including TDK Ventures.
See, I
see my team nodding very strongly, so that's good.
I thought it was my pitch to be like ruler of the universe. It was intended
Michael,
to be.
We love your inputs, but we're going to do it anyway.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll take that as a win.
Exactly. Let's shift gear. Or maybe a different filter, which is Europe. How do you see the opportunity for Europe? Clearly, technology is global, but is there ways where Europe can shine? And maybe it's a pun intended with wind and solar, but is there something that Europe can do in terms of policy, regulation, or else?
It's funny. I have a kind of love-hate relationship with the EU. But
you didn't say. You see what he did? Not Europe, EU.
Well, no, because when you say is there something that Europe can do, the mechanism, the biggest lever that you can pull is essentially EU policy in a way. And look, I love it because they are super engaged and consistently engaged over decades and so on. But do I necessarily agree with the direction of travel? So I have criticized I'll call it Europe because you just told me off. But I've criticized Europe, but particularly the EU in the past, for being essentially anti-innovation and anti-competitive. So they make a big song and dance about being pro-innovation, but actually, when you look at what, for instance, the Horizon or whatever those programs are, they're really social programs. They're really about, so the mainspring of Europe I see as the suppression of competition, and the mainspring of innovation is competition.
Absolutely.
So there's this kind of tension there. And then you see all these sort of political weirdnesses, but they sort of pushing on the things that can be, where consensus can be built. So hydrogen, everybody loves a hydrogen strategy, so we'll have one of those. But, let me just talk about the EU hydrogen strategy. They want to have 20 million tons of, 10 million made in Europe, 10 million imported, right? Supposing there's a €2 per kilo cost disadvantage against grey hydrogen, €2 per kilo, which is about right. Makes the maths easy. So you want to do 20 million tons, which is 20 billion kilos, and you've got a €2 disadvantage per kilo. That's 40 billion euros that's needed every year to close that gap, right? That's just on the supply side. Nobody yet is using this stuff. You're just trying to make it.
Yep.
And then, if you want a project, if you want, this is a sort of venture and tech group, but if there's over somewhere else, in a parallel universe, there's a project finance group trying to figure out Europe's strategy, and they need not 1 year of support, they need 15 years. So that 40 billion euro gap actually is a 600 billion euro gap. Because if you really wanted 20 million tons, then the treasuries of all the European countries would have to sit down, write the checks for 600 billion euros today to get there. So you get this kind of dialogue of the therefore, you get these fake discussions about, we're going to innovate, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and they're going to do minuscule amounts of it. Yeah. That's the reality. So I worry about sort of the lack of real understanding of how innovation happens, and then these kind of grand visions and then of course that all has to get translated into. So it's very cumbersome, but bless them anyway because they're trying.
I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask you a question you're going to love.
Which means I'm not, presumably.
Oh, I think you will.
Okay, right.
Imagine you're the ruler of EU. You see? What would you do?
And I'm not allowed to disband it.
You're the ruler of EU. You do what you want.
It's very difficult because am I a ruler constrained in the exact same way, or am I an absolute monarch? We're getting into some detail. It is a job application. I knew it.
It's fair. You have absolute rights, but you have the same budget. You can't tax more.
Well, so look, I mean, on the technology front, I would be shifting and doing a lot more around electrification of, and I actually think that electrification of transport is basically, over the hump. It's going. It's over the tipping point. Would I do stuff to accelerate that? Yes, of course I would. But heating and industrial heat, I would be looking for. I would definitely put a European strategy for electrification of heat and industrial heat right the way up and down the temperature curve. So I'm working right now with my Eco-Pragma Capital's got its second heat pump financing that we're working on, and that could be potentially huge, but that only goes up to steam at 200 degrees centigrade, European company. But actually right the way up and down, glass, cement, annealing of metals and electrochemistry. I think that leading in that space, Germany has done fantastically well with mechanical engineering and chemistry, and I think there's an opportunity to get that leadership position, for another 100 years by leading in those things. I mean, and the other one, of course, would be, I know there's got to be something around venture and why it is that we have all these companies. We think a success is a company with an exit at 100 million euros. And I'm guilty of that with new energy finance. But, the capital formation, I think the other thing I would do is I would try and figure out why it is, two things that are structural. Why can't we manufacture in Europe? What is it? Because it's all very well raising barriers, having carbon border adjustments or tariffs or this or that. But the fundamental problem is why can't, I worry about these gigafactories, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's going to have a few gigafactories, fantastic. But if that just means that our batteries will be 30 to 50% more expensive than ones made in Asia. And what is it? It's not labor.
No, it's only a percentage of
that. But it's not. These are dark factories, right? Yeah. Now, if you look at a battery factory or a solar factory in China, I bet you don't see anybody on the floor, shedding skin and bits of clothing and hair and ruining the product. So no, these are completely human-free areas. So it is to do with cost of capital, it's to do with manufacturing technology, and it's to do with long-term signals. When I said bless the EU for being consistent, but they're not consistent in creating markets and demand. I mean, maybe what I'd be looking at is shifting more towards kind of create demand that is consistent. I mean, now, we've got a problem in the wind industry. It's all come grinding to a halt. Because of the inflation spike, and we've just had a failed auction in the UK. How are you supposed to build a supply chain? And what China would be doing is very cheap capital and telling them, don't worry, we will make demand. We will make demand. And I don't know if I'm allowed to do that.
If you're the ruler, you can really tell industries to create that demand. Because you have a point. Why can't Europe do same price parity for gigafactories?
Yeah, I think the other, I guess I'm conflicted here because I'm naturally a conservative, small c, actually big C as well, but mainly small c conservative. So I like when entrepreneurs do things. I don't like when the state, because the risk here is that it's kind of, the state will tell you what what factories to build what equipment, to sell what mix of energy into what industries at what price. And I think we know where that ends, with massive misallocation of resources, as it, by the way, probably is in China right now. We're seeing China reach the end of its, Japan reached, it had whatever it was, 3 decades of vast growth and then stagnated. And I suspect that's what we're going to see in China, because there's only so much you can do misallocating resources and then having a demographic time bomb.
Okay.
So I don't know if I would want to go and replicate that. But there's things like, if we're not good at manufacturing, how good is Europe at additive manufacturing? How good are we at the future of logistics? There are some structural things that can be done that are about, availability of bandwidth. Why is it that, all the exciting stuff still comes out of the US? What are we doing wrong? you know, Chat GPT or all these things, you know, but you know, so I was at business school in 1990, and Harvard Business School had decided the only thing that anybody could do is copy the Japanese. It was 1990. The Japanese had just bought the Rockefeller Center in New York, and everything was TQM and just in time and Kaizen, and we just had to learn how to be Japanese, and that was it. And of course, it marked the moment that Harvard decides that's the way to do something. That marks the point at which you know, you then saw these kind of 3 decades of not just you know, the internet exploding in the US and incredible leadership and people like Amazon and so on, and Apple and whatever, but also then fracking. Why is it that the US just repeatedly is able to surprise us with these world-changing innovations, and Europe just, you know, you get look at all the money spent on those Horizon programs. Right? We spend, I think it's 7 or 8 billion euros a year. I say we don't anymore. They do. And can anybody here name one company that emerged from it? You know, it is literally hundreds and hundreds of billions of euros on innovation, and I can't think of a company that it's created. I think that's shattering. That is absolutely embarrassing and shattering. And then they'll talk about, oh, well, how many papers that they've all authored, and the fact that there was this nice consortium with some Romanians and some Bulgarians and some Germans and some Austrians and a Finn, and it was fantastic. So what?
So I'll take questions from the audience, including from online. But because I don't have a timer, I'll say in 5 minutes. But you talked about the US, so maybe we should think about, can Europe do something even smarter than the IRA Act? And what would it look like?
So the IRA, it's funny, something smarter, definitely yes, because you could do the IRA without some of the stupid bits, right?
Do you know which ones are the stupid bits?
Well, yeah, the hydrogen ones for a start. I had on my podcast, so cleaning up my podcast, I had a chap called Marco Alveraz, he's the CEO of TES, and I don't feel embarrassed in naming him because you know, he came on the podcast. And what he said was about the IRA, he's doing synthetic methane, he calls it ENG, and he wants to do ENG for Europe and for Japan. And he said the quiet part out loud. He said, you can make a lot of money by layering the subsidies, the IRA subsidies. Yeah. You get a subsidy for generating renewable energy, you get a subsidy for making electrolysis of hydrogen, you get a subsidy for capturing carbon. And then he says, and the best thing is, you can export that molecule. So I went and I calculated how much you actually get from those subsidies, and it is $70 per million BTU of gas. A million BTU of gas, Henry Hub, it's traded, is worth dirty $2.70, and if you add a carbon price, it's worth about $8.
The wrong incentive.
So $70 of US taxpayers' money to produce a commodity that's worth $8, right? So if you want to say, could Europe do something smarter than that? Yeah. And it's just over subsidies, and it's not clear, this layering of subsidies and so on. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be sort of trench warfare to slow down those parts. So, you know, now they're talking about what does clean hydrogen mean? And they've got this 3 pillars discussion. And I think what will happen is that I don't think that they can either repeal the IRA and or change the incentives, or they can just make it, you know, sort of difficult in the detail to actually qualify for it. And I think we're going to see quite a bit of that. Having said that, there is a lot of IRA money that will flow into, you know, batteries and into all sorts of things. What could Europe do? I think Europe could streamline and make it easier to qualify. I mean, because, you know, you'll get Fit for 55 or Repower EU, and that will be negotiations for a year or two, and the Hungarians will object because, you know, we're being nasty to these appalling Russians and so on. And that'll take a year and a half to get through. But then it has to go through to the individual countries. And, you know, it's just years and years before you actually get the check. And I think there's a lot that needs to be done just to speed that up, just to disperse the money and to think about. It's something that's really different between doing business in America and doing business in Europe. In America, time is money, and in Europe, time doesn't seem to figure at all. Speed and momentum. You know, your startups. You know, you get European entrepreneurs, you know, worrying about 5% more or less dilution. Who cares? You're supposed to be doubling the value of the damn business every year, right? Every 18 months. So why are you worrying about 5%? If you're worrying about 5%, 10% dilution on your cap table, you are thinking about the wrong things, right? And Europeans sort of don't get that. And Americans, I think they do understand, and then it's like fail fast. Do it, get the money, fail fast. IRA, even if billions, even if tens of billions are misallocated, they'll get to the end of the 10-year period, and they're very good also at sweeping aside the dross, the stuff that didn't work. They'll just sweep it aside and move on. Whereas in Europe, we'll try and kind of somehow make it work and keep it going, and whether it's real estate busts and whatever. The US just cleans this stuff up and moves on. So those are the things I'd be telling them to do.
I have so many questions to follow on that, but I promise the audience to have a chance. I want to go first for the online audience. Jan, do we have nice questions?
The question is, Michael, could it be that China is not more competitive? It has this massively misallocated capital and has overinvested to the point where all of its green tech leaders are showing the same problematic that Western clean tech is experiencing. Is
the question that has that happened, or is there a risk that it happens?
Has it happened?
I'll be honest, I'm not enough of a China expert to know kind of what proportion of the sort of stimulus of the economy has been misallocated. It's clearly very substantial. What's interesting is I was on the board of Transport for London, and we have sort of 150-year-old underground tunnels, and I can tell you they're really difficult to maintain. When concrete starts dropping off things, they're not 150 years. Some of them a lot of stuff that was built in the 1970s. We have no idea how we're going to maintain it. And China, one of the issues on infrastructure this is, not on the clean tech suppliers, that you have a huge amount of infrastructure that was built in a very compressed period with largely no thought about maintenance and end of life. And so I think that's going to be a huge challenge for China to make sure that your bullet trains stay, on track or floating or whatever they do, over decades and decades, and the real estate and the airports and so on. There's a real risk as your population, the working population is now shrinking, that just much, much more of your resource is going to go into fighting entropy rather than creation and new. In terms of the clean tech, I think that you've really got globally competitive companies on solar and increasingly wind. So the two biggest wind turbines on the books that are being designed now are actually being designed by Chinese companies, not by Vestas, GE. So you've got Siemens doing a huge write-off. Siemens, they're pulling back offshore wind in the US, which means inevitably they will be restructuring and downsizing a bit. Vestas losses, historic scale loss. And meanwhile, the Chinese wind industry, I think, is in pretty good, in better shape. But you've also got these other trends to do with the de-risking. It's not really decoupling, but if you look at the West is very uncomfortable with the over-reliance on the solar industry or on the critical minerals, and I think that you will see action on that. I don't think there'll be a decoupling, but I do think that if you're talking about where is the next plant to process Australian spodumene into lithium for batteries, then I think it's going to be probably outside China rather than inside. Mm. And the Chinese companies will respond. They'll just say, fine, then we'll build it in Vietnam or we'll build it in somewhere, and they're doing that. So I don't see, traders are very important, but I've just come off, you introduced, I'm not on the board of trade anymore, I've just come off that. We clearly, to drive the transition as quickly as possible, we need global trade. Yes. So we don't need tariffs against Chinese dumping or whatever. We need that trade, but I think we will see something of a sort of separation and more geostrategic competition between the big blocks. And by the way, I'm in favor. Competition spurs innovation. So we didn't put a man on the moon or the first satellite in space by getting together and having all space engineers. We did build the space station. So it's kind of there are two models, competition and cooperation. but very often the competition, all the people going to COP28 we're in now, they only believe in one model, which is cooperation and sort of global government and so on. But actually, you need both. You need the interplay and the tension. You need the competition. So IRA versus Europe is a fantastic, that will spur a lot of, that get a lot of people focused on innovation.
I like this golden nugget. Yes, collaboration and competitions both needed. I want to take a question from the audience. Do we have the microphone? Perfect.
Just first of all, thank you so much for everything on hydrogen. Sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy in other forums. This is great. Second, very quickly, actually, I'm going to be at COP in the green zone, but definitely believe in competition as a big driver. But just one thing that I'm kind of really looking for the help and support on how to think about that, because so I've been spending a lot of time between Dubai and London recently, based here, but spending a lot of time there. And every time I go there, I feel there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of things happening, things are moving forward, there's a vision, even with lots of differences, but it's very vibrant. And I come back here and all I feel is we're just running in place. And even I look at the government plans and everything, that it's kind of almost depressing. Like there's no view of going anywhere. It seems like we're just trying to keep things as they are or not deteriorating. There's no, it's like, I don't know. I feel like there's this big lack of ambition also compared to the US.
So to a certain extent, I have to acknowledge, we are in we're in the last, year or 14 months or whatever before an election, and it's clearly going to be a decisive election. I mean, what are the two outcomes? We either get a change of government or we get a kind of almost like a 1992 style, conservatives hang on and nobody quite knows, how, which is what happened in I think it was 1992. But meanwhile, I was on the UK Energy Efficiency Task Force, which got shelved. And, it was an interesting exercise because some of the people on it were very ambitious. And I was saying, look, we're a year before an election. They're not going to put new initiatives, huge new amounts of money, new whatever. But actually, there was a lot that we could do, and we were doing. And I was sad to see it go because I was leading on the industrial side of things. So we've got that kind of pre-election sort of atmosphere. I think also, realistically, the conflict, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine in Europe has diverted a lot of, it also feels like a much more tense period. That if that wasn't happening, there would be more emphasis perhaps on on innovation and whatever. But I would also push back though, because the UK, for all its aimlessness, right, is leading the G20 in decarbonisation. We don't quite know how or why, but we are, right? And I'd say that as somebody, there was the carbon floor price, there was the removal of coal, there was this, partly there was that, partly our, housing stock actually, has improved and become more efficient, partly we are actually quite good at cars. Does anybody here know that we are the 8th biggest manufacturing nation in the world? Right, now, if you read The Guardian and The Independent, you would think that we're some, crappy country, barely ahead of Belgium, right? The fact is that we're number 8 in the world, and it's all value add. Do we make chemicals and steel anymore? No, not really. I mean, we do make some steel and some chemicals, but we're actually really good at value-added manufacturing. And on the Board of Trade, I've been around the country. The best welders in the world are in Barrow-in-Furness welding submarines, right? We're talking about really serious, where the welding is controlled by computer and numerical this and that and so on. Incredible stuff. And I've gone around the country, and there's a lot more optimism and a lot more going on around the country than there is in London. In London, the media has decided we're crap and that Brexit has ruined everything and that we're just waiting for, Keir Starmer, to...
You can feel Michael is very... Let's zoom out from London and UK. Because we only have 1 minute, and I want to challenge you.
So I guess I sort of reject the premise a little bit.
Very nice. A big challenge for you. You can only answer in 1 minute. You've been nominated ruler of the global world.
Good, finally.
Finally, but you only have 5 years to rule.
Right.
And it's all about maximizing, optimizing, accelerating net zero.
Yeah.
What would you do?
I would reform campaign finance in the US and take 4 years and 11 months off?
This is really good, actually.